My town halls, I'm doing them a little differently this summer, and this is, I think, my 10th of August. I'm doing them on themes that are particularly relevant to areas of my district. I have, as you know, very large, very diverse, very divided district. Goes from here, California border, up to Sweet Home, Oregon. A lot of points of view, a lot of land in between, a lot of different needs and concerns. Up in the valley, I've been hearing an awful lot in Eugene and Corvallis about the president's policies in the Middle East and his threats to attack Iran. His national security advisor has for more than 12 years advocated preemptively attacking Iran. That would be unconstitutional, but the president says he has the authority to do it because of the authorization to use of military force from 2001. It's not true, but I have introduced legislation on war powers to reassert the constitutional authority of Congress when it comes to initiating a war that isn't a defensive action by the United States. So I had an expert up there on war powers, a constitutional law scholar. We held town halls up there on war powers down in Roseburg. We've had some real problems with the VA and other issues regarding provision of health care, so I did a health care town hall there. My staff is saying, hold the microphone closer. And sorry. But here on the coast, what I hear most frequently, particularly after the slide on 101, our issues here on the coast is infrastructure needs, federal investment needs in the South Coast. So, in fact, I just had a breakfast meeting with a couple of mayors, county commissioners, port folks, and others to talk about those issues. We had a good hour-long discussion. So we're going to do this a little different today, so I'll do a short presentation, and then we'll hear from the Corps of Engineers, the Coast Guard, and the Oregon Department of Transportation. Yesterday we toured the lower Rogue to see the problems with the harbor entrance and the gravel accretion down in the lower part of the river. The good news is we've got about $1 million allocated next year for dredging on the lower Rogue. Hopefully we'll have better access into the harbor. That comes through money allocated to the Corps of Engineers. Now, I've been trying for a very long time, actually 23 years to be exact, to spend the harbor maintenance tax on harbor maintenance. Every time you buy an imported good that came into this country through a port, you pay a little tiny sales tax. You don't even know about it. It's an ad valorem tax. This was instituted back in the Reagan era. And the idea was we're going to have a dedicated source of funding. We're a maritime nation to maintain our ports, our jetties, keep them dredged, and do the other things, breakwaters we need to do. For years, Congress has diverted this money and only spent part of it. And there's about $10 billion that's been collected, has not been spent on harbor maintenance, and yet we have huge backlogs. The Corps of Engineers, not just for harbors, but the Corps of Engineers has close to a $40 billion backlog of critical infrastructure projects across the country. $40 billion, which is about 8 times their annual budget, but who's counting? And so I've been working, I started working with a guy named Bud Schuster, who was a Republican, who chaired the committee in 96, and then all the way up to Bill Schuster, who chaired the committee until this year when I became chair. Bud's son, that's how long I've been fighting this, a generational fight. Twice when Bill was chair, I moved the bill out of the committee to spend the harbor maintenance tax on harbor maintenance. But in a very rare maneuver, Speaker Paul Ryan had it pulled out of the bill because he was against spending the money on harbor maintenance. He wanted to spend it elsewhere. Speaker Ryan's gone. The Republicans are in charge. I chair the committee. I moved the bill out of my committee unanimously in the spring, and it's going to come up next month in the House of Representatives. In one of my meetings with the President about infrastructure, this was something where he was, I said, Mr. President, we've got almost $10 billion we've collected in the tax, we haven't spent it, and he turned to someone, I think it was Chow or someone, he says, spend that money. So I think we'll get the president to sign the bill. We just have to get past Graveyard Mitch in the Senate and hopefully get the bill out of the Senate. The good thing is Senator Shelby, conservative Republican from Alabama, wants very badly to do this, and he's been pushing for it, so hopefully that'll actually happen. So that'll relieve pressure on the Corps for their projects everywhere, but it'll also help us to move projects up on the South Coast that need doing. I just visited the Port Orford breakwater yesterday, which we're rebuilding, but up at Coos Bay, the North Jetty has lost 1,000 feet. We're finally working on the North Jetty on the Columbia River. We've got issues here in Brookings and with siltation in the harbor. I mean, there's a whole host of things that we could be doing if we were spending all that money. So hopefully that'll happen. The biggest issue relates to roads, bridges, highways, transit, surface transportation. That's a 6-year bill. It's due on October 1st, 2020. If we don't do a bill, spending will actually drop, and spending is already very inadequate. We have a massive backlog there. 47,000 bridges on the national highway system need repair or replacement, substantial repair or replacement. 40% of the national highway system is degraded to the point where you have to rebuild it, not just resurface it. And in our urban areas, we have a $100 billion backlog to bring transit up to a state of good repair and help get people out of their cars in congestion. Earlier this year in March, early April, when we met with the president, and he bid us up to $2 trillion. I mean, the conversation was actually a little amusing. We're there, and after he went off on a couple other things, as he's wont to do, but we got past that, he turned to Speaker Pelosi and said, well, Nancy, what are you thinking? And she says, oh, $1.5 trillion. And he says, no. She says, no. 1.9. And they said, no, 2. 2 sound better. We're like, okay, sure, we'll take $2 trillion. And so we got bid up, and it was a very positive meeting. And the idea was in 3 weeks we'd come back and talk about how we're going to raise the money. Unfortunately, his right-wing anti-government acting chief of staff came back from California, brought a parade of people through the White House, and they convinced the president that he shouldn't go ahead with investment in infrastructure. And the next meeting, he just came in for a minute and then walked out. But he did indicate to Speaker Pelosi just before we left Washington at the end of July that he would like to reinitiate discussions. And she had myself and Richie Neal, the chairman of Ways and Means, who would have to come up with the money. I come up with the policy, he comes up with the money. We said, sure, if you'll talk money, we want to sit down, because that's the only way we're going to get past McConnell. We have to have the president. So that's a work in progress. Airports, we had a little discussion at my meeting here with the local officials. Obviously, if you're flying commercially, your principal access is generally Crescent City. Some people go up to North Bend, but that's not a lot of air service there, not a lot here either. This is an essential air service airport. We get federal subsidies to get flights in there. And I worked with the representative from that district, first Mike Thompson, then Jared Huffman. Things take a long time in Washington, over about 10 years, and we got them a larger federal match to build a new terminal there. I don't know if you've seen it yet. I haven't seen it completed, but it's not the concrete block outhouse that we used to use. It's way improved, and now what we have to do is work on improving the number of flights we get and the options you have there, which I just met with a group of people who work in Oregon. There's 400 businesses in Oregon that relate to aviation. Some of them are breaking new ground in terms of the potential for electric plane transit on a regional basis up to 400 miles. So we get away from carbon pollution, and we get basically not on-call, but potentially sort of shared service at a lower price than you would get if you tried to charter an aircraft using Part 135 certified carriers, so it would be safe. And so there you have they've gotten $2 million from the state to work on this, and I'm going to work with them, and so hopefully we will be able to maybe even provide options right here. They would use local. We have 97 general aviation airports in Oregon. They would use local GA airports in many cases. If they could aggregate 4 or 5 people from Brookings who needed to go to Portland or somewhere else, the plane would come in, take you up there, and you get a huge discount from from what it would cost to do charter. So, but also to do airports like Crescent City or Eugene now. I doubt many of you drive all the way up there. Maybe some of you do. I use it almost every week. their passenger loads have grown so much, they need to build a new concourse. But Congress hasn't allowed them to increase the user fee, that is a passenger facility charge, since the year 2000. This is a program I created. I live in Springfield. When Eugene built a new airport, the only way they could pay for it was to do it with property tax bonds. And I said, well, that's not exactly fair, because I don't pay property taxes in Eugene, but I use the airport more than probably anybody in Eugene, or almost anybody. And so I created a federal program where the airports could charge a small fee when you go through for the users to build security and gates and facilities. And we find that when airports expand, actually what happens is you get more competition. Now the airlines hate that idea. So the airports say, if you have to pay another $2 to go through the Eugene airport, have another concourse and have other airlines there potentially, you will never fly again. That $2, you're saying, I'm not flying. But they can charge you another 20 or 50 bucks for your bag, or $20 to sit on the aisle, and you'll thank them for it. So I'm involved in a huge fight with the airlines over that. Whether I can get that one past the goal line remains to be seen. Clean water, I think I mentioned this earlier, maybe not. We have needs here locally and throughout my district, particularly in smaller communities, for wastewater treatment. And the federal government used to be a good partner. The government doesn't partner anymore. I'm working on the first reauthorization of a federal program to cost share with communities on a sliding scale basis, depending upon the incomes in those communities, for mandated upgrades in their systems. And when I was a county commissioner in Lane County, we got an 80% federal match. Now the match would be 0. That will be the first reauthorization since 1987. And I almost have agreement with the Republicans on my committee to do that. My committee works very much on a bipartisan basis. And then finally, Coast Guard. We got a number of Coasties here. I want to thank them for working without pay for 35 days. And I'm trying to make sure it never happens again. I introduced a bill, got close to 200 co-sponsors on it, to say that in the case of a shutdown, the Coast Guard would be paid in the future, like all the other uniformed military services. Unfortunately, because of the way we have stupid budget rules in the House, they say this would increase the budget because we would have to pretend we would never pay them, and therefore by my saying we'll pay them, then that costs more money, and it doesn't, because we're always going to pay them, but we pay them retroactively and cause hardship. Anyway, I had to take it out of the bill to move the bill out of the House because there's an increase in the budget for the Coast Guard to do all the things they do and get them a new class of patrol cutters, get them finally start rebuilding. We're almost out of icebreakers here in the United States, not a good thing for a maritime nation, particularly since the Northwest Passage is opening up, and because of climate change. And the bill was otherwise really good and bipartisan. The Republicans agreed with me on that too, but my leadership said, no, you got a budget rule against it. But the Senate has put it in their bill, and we'll go to conference with the Senate, and I hope to get that done. So that's a few things I'm working on, and we're going to hear a bit from each person, and then we'll take questions. We'll first focus on questions that relate to the issues here, infrastructure writ large, and then we will go from that, if we run out of those kind of questions, to other general questions to conclude the meeting. So with that, I've got to get my order of, yes, I got the order right, and when I did one of these, I really surprised someone because I put them first and they were last. So, but first we'll hear from Colonel Aaron Dorff, Commander of the Corps of Engineers for the Portland District. Colonel.
Congressman, thank you. I also want to thank our Coast Guard and ODOT partners who will be speaking as well. So really what I've been asked to do is spend a couple of minutes talking about me and what we do for you, and then I'll kind of focus in a little bit more specifically along the Oregon coast, and specifically here in the Port of Chetco and the Chetco River and Brookings, and kind of talk a little bit about what we're doing here. So for me, as a commander, I'm one of 43 district commanders. So if you look at the Corps of Engineers, large organization, there's 43 districts. And we're one of them. And so our district is primarily the state of Oregon, and we've got the ports in southwestern Washington, and that's kind of what we do for the Corps of Engineers. Also today, I've got a couple of folks with me. I've got Kate, who is the project manager, who also works with the port here, and she takes care of the dredging, and I've got some other folks here. So there's other questions we can answer that at the end. So we're also one of the 5 districts within the Northwestern Division, and that covers most of the Pacific Northwest out to the Missouri Basin. So we are watershed based. So as part of the Portland District, we have the Lower Columbia, we have the Willamette River Basin, the Rogue River, and then we manage the dredging for the ports along the Oregon coast. As part of what we do is we have 8 authorized purposes, and they're focused around waters of the United States. And so we do flood risk management, hydropower, water management, regulatory, recreation, navigation, environmental stewardship, and emergency management. So all of those different functions are really is what the Corps does. We operate 3 large lock-in dams in the Columbia River. So the Bonneville, John Day, and the Dalles is also part of the district. And we do the 13 dams in the Willamette Valley and 2 in the Rogue. So Lost Creek up on the Rogue River is one of our projects as well. As part of those 13 dams and the 3 large power plants, we have 12 hydropower plants, and of that, 3 of the 5 largest hydropower plants in the country belong to Portland District and straddle the Columbia River between Oregon and Washington. And that's important because that generates it has a capacity of 6 gigawatts of power. So we generate a lot of power for the region as well, and that would power about 3 million homes. As part of the regulatory mission, we cover the state of Oregon and the southwestern ports of Washington. That's the regulatory boundaries. So with the Corps of Engineers is we're watershed based, but there's other different boundaries, and the regulatory boundary is by state. So we regulate the state of Oregon for the federal part, which is the Section 404, the Clean Water Act, discharge of fill, and Section 10, working in the navigable waters. We maintain 22 navigation channels and 12 large-scale jetty projects within the state of Oregon. So there's quite a bit of footprint for the district. The district also manages about 485 miles of navigable rivers in the Columbia and other basins. So that's quite a bit of water management for us. And as part of that navigation mission, our mission is to provide safe, reliable, efficient, environmentally sustainable waterborne transportation systems. So what does that really mean? And that means that we manage jetties, breakwaters, groins, timber piles, and we do the dredging, again, along the coast and in those river miles. So those are the key things for us. And for us to accomplish that mission, we have some specific assets. So as part of the district, we've got a fleet of survey boats that comes out and does the surveys to determine the depths, which then allows us to determine what type of asset we use for dredging. So also within the district, we have 2 large hopper dredges. We have a 200-foot hopper dredge called the Aquina, which you probably see. It was designed so it can fit inside the harbor here, and it's a very large boat in a small harbor, but that's one of the assets we use for dredging. We also have the Essayons, which is a 350-foot hopper dredge with about 5,500 cubic yard capacity, and that dredge is all the way down to the Port of Morrow. We do Los Angeles District, which is in Southern California, all the way up to Grays Harbor, and we also do dredging all the way out to Honolulu. So we cover a pretty big swath of dredging in the Pacific Northwest with the federal fleet. There's also the Dredge Oregon, which belongs to the Port of Portland, which you'll see is a pipeline dredge. If you're up fishing in the Columbia River, you'll see that up and down there. And then we have a fleet of clamshells and other dredges. Some are excavators on barges, and there's quite a number of clamshells that we use up and down the Oregon coast based on the type of substrate. Some is rocky, some are cobble, some is sand. So we try to get the right asset and the right tool to make it most cost effective to be able to meet the mission that we have. So dialing a little bit further, just to close out here, in specific to the Brookings and the Chetco River, the Dredge Aquina was here. It removed this year 33,000 cubic yards of material in June and July, and then we spent about $800,000, so we were funded to do that, which was pretty good. I believe the congressman mentioned that. We also have the jetties are in good condition, and then for next year, the president's budget has about $954K for the entrance dredging. And then we've also expressed capability subject to funds to be able to do additional work in the turning basin. So that's kind of what we have here. And I know Kate works right with your port to make sure that we're dialed in so we know exactly what the challenges are so we can be successful for you. So with that, thank you, and I'll pass off to Captain Sabo with the U.S. Coast Guard.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank you to Representative Defazio for inviting the Coast Guard to participate in today's town hall. So I do want to just thank our partners with the Army Corps of Engineers. They do a fantastic job with the resources that they're given. And to be honest with you, the 8 rivers and waterways that the Coast Guard operates in the area of response that we have for 220 miles of coastline, we would not be able to do that without the Corps of Engineers doing their work. So how about another round of applause for them? So, as I mentioned, my name is Olaf Sabo. I'm the sector commander up in North Bend, and we have jurisdiction for primarily maritime search and rescue and law enforcement, primarily around here protecting the fisheries offshore. And that goes from Lincoln City down just a little bit south of here down to the California-Oregon border. And in that area, we have 6 boat stations. And with me today is Master Chief Dave Pierce. He's actually the officer in charge right here at Station Chetco River. And it's always a pleasure to get down to this end of our area of response, our AOR. And for some reason, Brookings always seems to be about 10 degrees warmer than Coos Bay and North Bend. And somehow you guys always have a little more sun. So again, I love coming down here and just seeing the great community that you all have and what our Coast Guard is doing down here for the community. I mentioned those 6 boat stations that I oversee from the North Bend area, and the one that I'd like to kind of focus on today is the one right here at Chetco River. We've got 44 active duty members here, and by the time you add in family members, we've got a little bit over 100 people that are affiliated with the Coast Guard here from an active duty standpoint. And you start adding in auxiliaries, and that number starts growing quite a bit. But these are your friends and neighbors. These are spouses that work out in the community. They're teachers, they're nurses. They are actually met one spouse today who's a banker. So they are your friends and neighbors. We are very proud to be a part of the communities in which we serve. And you definitely have that down here. And I just wanted to take a couple seconds and thank you to the community here in Brookings for what you did during the government shutdown. It was, I'll be honest, it was overwhelming to see the outpouring of support that you all gave to your coasties. Many of them living paycheck to paycheck, and when you don't get 1 or 2 of those, it definitely has an impact. And what you all did through donations and just reaching out and having some sympathy for your fellow coasties really went a long ways. And had a chance to talk to the crew this morning. They wanted me to convey that to you all. So thanks again for what you do and what a strong community you have here. The Congressman mentioned infrastructure. So again, part of that is the Coast Guard. We talked about the dredging, and which allows us to operate our boats and to get out there and be able to provide that search and rescue capability, towing in some cases for the commercial fishing fleet, and helping protect those recreational fishermen. How many of you are recreational fishermen that like to get out on the waters here? Yeah, a few of you, and probably a few that aren't admitting it, but yeah, the Congressman's included there. So yeah, it's important that we continue to maintain that infrastructure, both the dredging, so we're able to get our boats out there to respond when you all need it, and as well as keeping up the stations and some of that infrastructure that again allows us to put boats, and in this case from what we run up in North Bend, from the helicopter side or the air side, to be able to not only do over the water stuff, but when the Curry County Sheriff or Fire Rescue needs some support too, and we're able to do that and provide that air support, it's important that we've got the infrastructure to be able to do that. So I've probably spoken enough. We'll have a chance, I think the Congressman will open it up to some questions, and if you don't have time during that question and answer session, but you've got something afterwards, if you've got 3 of us coasties here today, that we'll be happy to stick around a little bit after the meeting, and feel free to come up to us and ask anything you want. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Oregon Department of Transportation and Frank.
Thank you very much, Captain, and thank you, Congressman, for this opportunity. So I'm Frank Reading, Southwest Region Manager for the Oregon Department of Transportation. I was asked to come talk with you a bit about some of the projects we have planned along the coastal area of our region. First, just a little bit about our region. Southwest area covers the 5 counties, Goose, Curry, Douglas, Jackson, and Josephine. We're responsible for the operation, the maintenance, the development of projects throughout that entire area. Got more than 350 employees, making sure that we're doing the best job we can to keep the transportation system going for everybody. I also have with me here today Darren Deeble, my district manager, who's been really responsible for a lot of the frontline work that you see happening out there. So if we have questions later on, he may help respond to some of those that I can't. I want to talk just a little bit about some of those projects that we've been engaged in. So provided most of you with copies of a table and a map that shows projects that are currently ongoing, recently wrapped up, or are planned for the next couple of years. You can see if you total those up, it's in excess of $200 million being spent here in this coastal region, and also on our critical east-west routes here, just in a few years. So just talking about some that are recently wrapped up, we got Thomas Creek Bridge, and also Reinhardt.
Finally.
I get that same reaction each time I do this. That's great. So I'm glad it's done as well. Those 2 bridges, critical bridges to the coast, just making sure that we keep the steel intact, make sure it's coated and protected against that harsh Oregon climate is extremely important. The cost to replace those type of structures are astronomical. So that was in excess of $14 million, or about $14 million for those 2 bridges. Other work in our area, we've got a lot of ongoing slide work. I think most of you recall February and March rain events. Most rain we've seen in a long time. I do know that this part of the region was hit pretty significantly with those events. Houskenaden, one of our main slides. We've got a saying that you name them and you fix them. If you name them, you keep working on it, right? And that's one of those that we've named. And it is a struggle for us. About every 10 to 15 years, that slide decides to walk towards the ocean. And we had that happen in February, late February. And we were able to aggressively attack it and get it back open to a single lane of gravel in about 13 days, which sounds great. Thank you. Thank you very much. But I do know that that is an impact on the community. We were able to open up Carpenterville Road, 17 miles of detour. Not the most desirable situation, I understand it. So that's one of those projects where we're thinking, take a little bit of, put a little extra effort into. We're going to actually program a project where we can analyze the area, actually looking at more from south of Port Orford all the way to the California border. There's a number of slides we've got to be really concerned about. Houskenaden is one, but there's others as well. We want to make sure we don't lose sight of those. Arizona also moved on us, and there is no detour for Arizona. So we need to see if there's lower cost alternatives to see if we can't provide some better, higher level of access for folks, if there's something we could do feasibly. Some of the initial costs we looked at for actually stabilizing Houskenaden were astronomical. Trying to work on the slide itself in excess of $300 million. And then there's no guarantee it will stay there. Working on spanning that with a span structure, again, probably another $50 million on top of that. And then looking at correcting Carpenterville Road in excess of $400 million. And that has 98 slides on it as well. So you can see and imagine the challenge. And we're going to continue to work and see if there's other things we can do to provide shorter detours or other things that would make it much more feasible for folks so it doesn't have such an impact on the community. Some of the other slides I mentioned in there are important as well. If you look at the total dollar amount spent to actually get those open and back in place, it's about $14 million. It's a lot of money. Those funds come from emergency relief funds. It's not the same as normal programming a STIP project. Those are because of our partnership with Federal Highway Administration and making that money available to us quickly so we can respond. And then it's been a fantastic partnership. Some of the upcoming projects we have, we've got here Parkview and Easy Street coming up. I think that's really important here. Brookings was competitive a number of years ago through our Enhanced program, which is federal dollars. And that'll be something to improve sidewalk on the north end of town here and takes care of some infill and replacing some deficient stuff. And then also just thinking a little bit more about another parallel east-west route is Highway 38, Scottsburg Bridge. That bridge has been a problem for us. It's Achilles' heel as far as I'm concerned. We get to put a new bridge there that'll be seismically stable and protect that route to get folks on that critical east and west direction. In closing, I would just say that the region and Oregon, the state of Oregon, rely heavily on federal funds to both maintain and enhance our transportation system. Couldn't do it without our federal partners. Also, I recognize the importance of having the chairman housed right here in Oregon to make sure our message of the transportation needs gets carried forward to Congress back in Washington. So, that's it.
Okay, we've got at least one microphone somewhere, do we?
We recorded one.
Oh, gonna be interesting. See how far it goes.
So I'm going to have the mic in the aisle. For anyone who wants to ask a question, please raise your hand, and if you can step towards the aisle, it will help. Thank you so much. Sir?
Yep. She can't get that far back, you'll have to come down. It won't go that far. Oh, yeah, sorry, but most places have remotes. They don't here, so go ahead, sir.
I know you'd like to keep it local, but I just feel like when we talk about big money, we ought to mention how much the United States spends in military. Part of the defense, Veterans Affairs, our biggest departments. It seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, and this is my question, don't we spend just about as much as the rest of the world in the military?
Again, it is a diversion from it. We do spend more than the rest of the world combined, much more than our adversaries or potential adversaries. And, I have tried for years, every year, from a law passed in the 90s, every agency of the federal government is audited. That's Social Security, Medicare, Department of Agriculture, everything is all audited except the Pentagon. Pentagon is not auditable. I managed with a guy named Rodney Frelinghuysen from New Jersey, not in Congress anymore, Republican. He and I, very late one night, or early in the morning during an appropriations bill when everybody was kind of tired, we got an amendment to require an audit of the Pentagon. But the way we worded it, they didn't know what we were doing. So the chairman of the committee accepted the amendment. And then they found out, wait a minute, you're going to audit the Pentagon? So they went to conference committee and it went away. With the Democrats in charge this time, we passed, I don't like the number for DOD, but we put in huge reforms into the Department of Defense. We're requiring an audit, first ever audit. Secondly, we're repealing the authorization for use of military force subsequent to 9/11, which, as the president is saying, would allow him to attack Iran or anybody else he wants. And we're doing another of other very, very substantial reforms of policy as relates to the Pentagon. Now, we still have to go to conference with the Senate, which will be difficult, but we're trying to rein this in. And one of the most objectionable things, and I was involved, I was a sponsor of an amendment on the floor to go after something called OCO. And OCO is Overseas Contingency Operations. Now, this came into effect back when Bush started the Iraq War, which I voted against, and the idea was the Pentagon didn't have enough money to fight the justified war in Afghanistan and to start another preemptive war in Iraq. So Congress created this thing called the Overseas Contingency Operation. And it's become a giant slush fund. And a number of us, I worked with Ro Kahana and a few others, to cut the OCO fund because that is just, there's basically no strings on it. And we did not succeed. We came fairly close, but we didn't succeed. We lost some Democrats and almost all the Republicans. So I'm going to keep plugging away at it. It's been something since I want a strong military. I want the troops to have what they need, but we don't need a lot of the things we're building. We don't need a new generation of nuclear weapons. We don't need a lot of things that and sometimes actually the Pentagon doesn't want some of these things, but Congress forces them to accept them. It's very much a work in progress, and you're right. So, next question.
Sir.
Thank you for your time. Forgive me if I don't give up. I'm a victim of the Vietnam War and Agent Orange, the war that just keeps on giving to its veterans. I'm going to have two parts of this. First, I'm going to explain something, and then second, I'm going to have a question for you. The first part is there is a procedure that is being conducted by the Roseburg VA. It's called spinal injections or epidural injections for pain.
For what?
For pain.
Oh, for pain, yeah.
Pain,
okay,
P-A-I,
sure.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, pain.
And this procedure, the company who makes the drug for this procedure says it is not to be used on humans, yet the VA Roseburg uses it. This procedure is not approved by the FDA, but Roseburg uses this anyway. This procedure is highly against, I can't remember the exact words, but the procedure is highly against DOD VA regulations. Yet the Roseburg still makes our veterans go through this procedure. That's the background. The question is, I filed a complaint about this and others back in January. This went to Dr. Glassman of the Roseburg VA, who was supposed to file ethics. He refused to deal with my letter and gave it on to the head of the Roseburg VA. Excuse me.
Take your time.
He has not responded to my letters.
Okay, well,
In March, I wrote you and several others about this situation. You wrote back, or your staff wrote back and said, we need access to your medical records. I supplied that immediately. So this was back in March and April. Since then, I have not heard a word from you or anybody else on this situation.
Okay.
Okay, I understand you're supposed to be for the veterans. I
Yep,
wonder
well-
why I keep slipping through the cracks.
Well, sir, my veteran specialist didn't travel with me down here. She's up in Eugene working on these issues. Chris, but you don't do veterans.
I can pass it on.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, if you talk to Chris in the back, we'll communicate with Whitney and find out. We get a lot of issues. I basically got all of the management of the VA hospital removed in Roseburg last year. I had heard complaints, particularly about the head surgeon, the director, and others. I had asked for an investigation. The VA blew me off. And then subsequently, my staff uncovered testimony on the Senate side where a whistleblower complaint that we had pursued with the Inspector General had been verified by a different office outside the VA. And getting that information, I went to, personally, I'm part of a group that Seth Moulton founded, a Marine veteran, called the Warriors Caucus. I served in the military, and we meet regularly and deal with veterans issues. And I took a summary of all the problems I'd had with the VA in Roseburg to the then secretary, and handed it to him personally and asked him to investigate. And we got 2 investigations, and I got virtually all of the management removed. They were incompetent, there was malpractice, there were a whole bunch of problems and things. We had a interim director who was great. He came from Florida, but he was being paid much more in Florida, and I couldn't get the VA to raise his pay, so he left in December. He'd gotten the hospital upgraded from a 1 to a 2+, almost a 3. And a lot of improvements were made. Your particular issue, individual issue, I will bring that up with my staff and we'll pursue it. We get a lot of issues, and I'm not certain that you've fallen through the cracks. It may be that we're still waiting or pushing the VA, even whether it's local or regional or nationally, I don't know, but yeah, I get it, sir, but we do, like I'm telling you, I have put a major amount of personal time into I'm basically managing the VA. I can't do it. Their administrative branch, and I'm actively working on these issues. So we will get a response from, Chris will get a response. You talk to her, from Whitney, and we'll get back to you.
I appreciate it.
Okay.
It's been 5 months now.
Yeah.
I feel stable.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Don't be shy.
My name's Eileen, I live in Brookings, and this is really far off of the topics.
Okay, hold the microphone closer,
Oh
Eileen.
dear, I'm not used to this.
All right.
This is really way far off of the topics that have been discussed so far, but I really feel it's very important, and I want to bring it to the attention of everyone in this room, as well as to you, Congressman Defazio. There is a program called the Medical Deferred Action Program. What that program is it allows immigrants and their children to stay in the United States while the children are being treated for terminal illnesses. They are here legally because of that act. President Trump's administration, once again, is proving they have no compassion, and they are revoking that. People in this program are now receiving letters giving them 33 days to leave the country. Some of them, they have to deliver the notices to children in the hospital. What kind of inhumane action is this? And I think we all ought to start writing our congressman. Last night I sent emails, including one to you. I sent one to the White House, to Pelosi, to McConnell.
Impeach.
Yes?
Impeach now.
The problem is these people only have 33 days. We should all be irate, regardless of our politics, that this is happening. And we should all stand up and help these children. They're committing murder, essentially, knowingly. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. NPR just did a very good article on this week. I think it was Monday, but a young man with cystic fibrosis from, I think it was Honduras, and they have no treatment down there, and he's getting treatment here and needs more treatment. So, and he said, if he goes back, he'll die. So it is incredibly inhumane, and you know, all of the policies regarding immigration are being run by a right-wing 29-year-old ideologue called Stephen Miller in the White House, and basically he gets his way. You know, we have passed, we passed a bill to totally reform the way we treat refugees and put all sorts of restrictions on the administration in the House. McConnell would not allow it to come up in the Senate. The INS and ICE were out of money, so the Speaker brought up the Senate bill. I didn't vote for it because I still thought we should have stayed in Washington and continued the fight. You know, we have tried, but you know, we can't. We haven't been able to get the Senate to act, and even if we get the Senate to act, then we're going to have to, in a couple of cases where we have gotten the Senate to act, regarding you know, what the president's Middle East policy and what's going on there, arming the Saudis and other things. The president's vetoed the bills, and we can't get 2/3 in the Senate. So it's an ongoing struggle. But I agree with you. It is absolutely inhumane. And so, if anybody have anything, come on down. And particularly if we have anything on topic, I'm happy to keep being off topic. But we do have experts here, and we could talk about the topic today.
Hi, my name is Karen Holmes, and I'm the director and founder of the World Peace Organization for the One World Government. And I wanted to address what everybody has been talking about, like your program. My organization, over the last couple of years, has been working to introduce a letter to the Supreme Court that addresses these issues about compassion, about the principles that our government stands on, that make our country great. Basically, there are 7 principles based on God's law. There's this misunderstanding in our legal system that allows our government to constitutionally justify power games that are oppressive. So as we introduce this at the Supreme Court level, we're trying to make it, bringing universal law back into our legal system to allow a sense of balance to be created again in our legal system. So I wanted you to be aware that there is a way to constitutionally address the wars, for example, and what's happening in Iraq and Iran. In his first trip to The CIA, President Trump announced that he was going to go into Iraq and take their oil. He hinted that he would like to take their oil. Well, that is unconstitutional to do that because basically we do not have the right to go into another country and take their oil, their natural resources, because under God's law, we would not
Okay,
want them to do
Karen,
that.
you've made presentations on this before, and people can visit the website to find out about one world government and the higher principles, but the point is that those things are also regulated under the Constitution of the United States and international treaties that we have, and under the UN existing laws that, again, as I set up, I reintroduced my legislation to reassert Congress's authority under the Constitution of the United States for war powers, which is that, the President is the Commander-in-Chief. The President does not have the authority to initiate a preemptive, discretionary, offensive war. The only things under the Constitution the President can do is defend our troops, defend the United States or our citizens against an attack. These things are covered by existing law. Unfortunately, Congress, many, many years ago, after the bombing of Cambodia, passed a bill called the War Powers Act. There were two versions, and the weaker version became law, which authorizes, actually, the President to initiate a war and then come to Congress and get permission within 60 days. And if he doesn't get permission or she doesn't get permission, it ends. Well, the problem is once you start shooting, Congress isn't about to shut off the money for the troops, for the ammunition or the air support or whatever they need. So my bill fixes that, and it just clearly restates the Constitution that the President cannot initiate hostilities, and I define hostilities very strictly because they define them very loosely. And Obama defined them loosely, and Clinton defined them loosely, and Bush defined them loosely, and just about every president we've had has. I've had many years of that. It's time to reinstate the Constitution. We don't need a whole new system or a one world government, just the Constitution of the United States would take care of it.
Hi, I'm Gary Arton. I'm a sports fisherman, and I have a lot of friends that are commercial fishermen, and the problem that we're having, I'm going back to dredging, if that's okay.
Sure, I'd love to get back to that. I got these people, we brought an expert panel, and they don't...
Anyway, they just dredged the channel, and we still have a problem. As you're leaving on the south jetty, we have a hump. I'm guessing it's sand that is pretty shallow, and I'm under the understanding that they can't dredge that out because it's not in the channel. Is there something the Corps of Engineers can do about that?
Can we get that specific? Can you? Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, unfortunately, that shoal is outside of our authorized federal channel, so we cannot address that particular shoal. We have to stay within the footprint of our federal channel.
What happens if we lose the boat?
It is a safety issue.
Well,
If the federal channel has been cleaned out to its authorized depth, so if you stay within the authorized channel, there should not be an issue. And that is clearly marked on navigation charts.
Can't we change the channel regulations?
I don't even know what the process is to, we have limited resources and, dredging, providing navigation and access to harbors within the federal navigation system is already a problem. On our 58 largest ports, we have 40% of authorized depths on a daily basis, and that's why I'm trying to free up the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. But even when we free up the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, given the massive backlog, we're not going to create a whole bunch of new federal navigation channels. We are going to provide safe access in and out of our harbors, but captains need to know where the channels are. I live on a boat in Washington, D.C. I spent a lot of time on boats in my life, and I know how to navigate, and I know not to get on the wrong side of a buoy in an area that's shoaling or shelving.
No buoys.
Well, then I don't know about the buoys. Maybe that would be and that's, I guess, is that Corps or Coast Guard? I'm not even sure who sets buoys.
Aids to navigation is the Coast Guard, Congressman.
Okay. So
we could talk offline.
Okay, so why don't you talk to the captain afterwards, and maybe we need to get a couple more buoys out there to show people where it is. They've got a temporary buoy up on the road, which the port put in, which is not an authorized buoy, in addition to the green regular buoy, which people know what the green ones means, but this one says pay real attention to this green buoy, or you're going aground. So, I mean, sometimes people need a little, especially people who don't come too often, they make mistakes. So like red right returning, I learned that when I was 5 years old, but some people don't know which way returning is when you're going upriver. So.
Yep, go ahead. Address the other part of that question is, when it comes to the federal channels, is that there are ways to change federal channels, and it would come with a congressional action. It would trigger a feasibility study, an investigation. We'd do the feasibility study, we'd generate a chief's report, and then that would Congress then could authorize a change to a channel. So there is means to do that, but we are the executor of it, we're not the initiator of it.
Okay, maybe just put it back in my pocket. But you talk about the aids of navigation, and then if some of these commercial guys want to get in touch with Kathy, where's Kathy? Kathy Erickson over there, who's my coastal representative based up in Coos Bay, but gets down here. They could talk to her, and then we could talk about, we are going to do a Water Resources Development Act, and I can in that authorize chiefs' reports, and if necessary, and we think this is really a potential hazard, I would ask for an investigation and chief's report, and then when they do a chief's report, they do a cost-benefit analysis, and they do a hazard analysis, and a whole bunch of other things, and then they determine whether or not it's worth doing, and then it comes back to Congress, and we either say, well, okay, we're going to authorize, and it takes a couple of years, but that would be, if we have to do it that way, we can take a look at it. Be happy to. So, all right. Sorry, man. I think you were.
My name is Jerry Thompson, and I have a gift and a thank you card and a picture in regards to the Checo Bar fire. And it's the 2-year anniversary of the Checo Bar mega fire, and my family and all of us up on Kate Road really want to say thank you for yours and Congressman Walden for authorizing a GAO investigation into the fire. I'd also like to thank Commissioner Sue Gold for her helping arrange an audience for us with the GAO when they were here so that we could show them our presentation of the investigation of what we found out about the fire. We think it's appalling that the U.S. Forest Service, a federal agency, cannot be trusted to provide truthful information to you, our congressman, or any of the citizens of Curry County in regards to the status and the progression of the fire when you were here on I believe it was August 21st, after we all burned. So we're hopeful that the GAO investigation will help us understand why the U.S. Forest Service appeared to willfully endanger so many of our people in our county. As a Kate Road survivor, my family was traumatized by the progression of the fire toward our property. We documented the tragedy with many, many photos and videos. On August 20th, we experienced the firestorm fueled by the Checo effect winds that were supposedly mythical. We heard the unforgettable crowning roar as we were spraying our own house down with our own water truck, trying to save as much of our historical property as possible. An experience that many knowledgeable and local people have said the fire could have been prevented, and you'll see the picture of the first picture of the fire, very, very small. So we ask for your help in the future to have a responsible agency put any fires out that start in the Kalmiopsis Wilderness area during fire season. Also, not to allow the use of fire as a tool during fire season. The mega fires have changed the landscape of the Kalmiopsis Wilderness from what many generations of my ancestors and myself have experienced in our lifetimes. So let's all work together to preserve the wild of the wilderness without wildfires. So thank you for all you've done for all of us in Curry County.
Okay, thank you. It's interesting. We have a new chief of the Forest Service since then. We have a new regional manager since then. And the current chief, I met with her early this year because the former chief and the woman who was head of fire were resistant to contracting for enough air resources to actually do early attack that we need to do, and that is probably what happened here, but we won't know until we get the investigation. They were on it, and then they left because we had a whole bunch of lightning strikes elsewhere. If they'd had more resources, they could have stayed on it and dealt with the others potentially. We'll get the investigation and learn from it and maybe change policy, but they're already doing better. When I was down here, I went with the chief both to the fire up on the Columbia, started by the kid with fireworks, which bridged the Columbia, bad fire, and then down here. And his head of fire, one of the questions that I asked them is, why can't we use the big tanker? Why haven't you contracted? And she said, oh, we're working on it, there's just a few issues of certification, whatever. Well, it turned out to be a lie. They had actually written a contract which excluded planes of that size from the contract. And so when I met with the new incoming chief, and her background is as chief of forestry in Washington State and also Forest Service, so she understands Northwest issues very well. And she agreed that this was all a mistake, and so she changed policy. They have contracted for way more air resources this year. Thus far, we haven't needed them. Let's hope we get through the next few days. And they've also contracted for the mega tanker, on an as-needed basis. So we're in a better place than we were. The other key thing, and the problem, again, we haven't hit this year, but Congress allocates usually $450 million, $500 million to the Forest Service to fight fires. And every year, almost every year for the last decade, that has proved to be inadequate because of the new intensity and the volatility and the dryness and the fuel buildups and all the problems we have in our forests. And so what happens when the Forest Service runs out of money is they can't stop fighting the fires, so they start pulling back other accounts. And one account they regularly pull back is fuel reduction. So they have contracts for fuel reduction, and they say, sorry, we just pulled your contract. You can't go out and do the fuel reduction. We have to use the money to fight the fires. This is called fire borrowing. And then Congress ultimately restores the money, but it's too late because now we're in a new budget year and that contract was canceled and they have to start all over again. And former Speaker Paul Ryan, for whatever reason I never understood, I tried for years to say, let's say that fires over a certain magnitude are not the responsibility of the Forest Service, the responsibility of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The Forest Service has the expertise to fight them, but FEMA will pay for it. And it won't come out of the Forest Service budget. Ryan actually wrote a dear colleague to everybody in Congress saying what a bad idea this was and opposed it. But now he's gone and we're changing the law on October 1st this year. In the future, when the Forest Service has expended its budget for fighting fires, they will no longer take it from other accounts. The Federal Emergency Management Agency will assume the obligation to pay for the fires. Fires are an emergency. I've said for years, okay, so a flood's an emergency, a hurricane's an emergency, an earthquake's an emergency. Why isn't a fire an emergency? And especially a very large fire. So the state will still have an obligation with State Department of Forestry, BLM contracts with them, and we'll still have the federal, but once we get over $400 or $500 million, then FEMA's going to pay for it. Forest Service will bring their expertise and fight it. And we're looking at how we're going to change early attack and other things. Hopefully, when we get this report, the GAO report should be available in October or early November. So, yeah, I know, Dan, we're going to have to get up the road, get a bunch of things, but go ahead.
Final question.
Yeah.
Congressman, my name is Yelena Novak. I'm the Director of Oregon Trout Commission. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you for continuous support of our commercial fishing industry in Oregon, and particularly my industry. I have two issues to bring up. First is a buyback relief initiative. Thank you for the support. We're still hopeful for that to be resolved.
Yeah.
And the second issue is the West Coast Groundfish Trawl Survey that has been instrumental for the sustainability of the whole fishery. And just as a reminder, it's always done in collaboration between federal government and the industry,
Right.
our Oregon. And we would have 2 vessels twice a year. during the whole West Coast survey. Well, unfortunately, National Marine Fisheries Service cut the budget in twice, and we have only 2 vessels left. Doing that, the data is deteriorating, and we expect it to deteriorate, and there's safety issues. We had 1 vessel broke down just a little north of the Mexico border, and there was no one to come and help them, because usually there would be the 2nd vessel. So we would like to seek the funding from NIMS to continue the survey.
Sure. Well, the surveys are critical, obviously, for sustainable fisheries. And I hear complaints a lot of times from the commercial folks, like, there's a lot of fish out there, but we can't prove it. And so that puts limits on their catch, et cetera, which is a problem. We want to rebuild fisheries. We don't want to overfish them like they've done a lot on the East Coast. We're doing way better than they are, but we need the research and the data. So we did in the House pass a budget that increases funding for National Marine Fisheries and for NOAA. I heard complaints about the buoy 15 miles out of Port Orford that's in op, so we don't know wave heights and winds and all that stuff. So we did do that in the House, but the Senate hasn't passed any appropriations bills. They're due on October 1st. I don't know how it's all going to work out. We'll see. But I recognize that problem when we get the buyback has been an issue that since the Bush administration. And I actually once cornered his Secretary of Commerce on the issue and on this. Just to explain it to the crowd is we were, because of constraints on the fishery, the stocks and that, we decided there were too many boats, too many licenses, and the industry said voluntarily, let's do a voluntary buyback. And okay, all good. They did this in New England and the federal government paid for the buyback. Here they said, no, the industry will pay for the buyback. All right, we still agreed to it. But the problem is it's the first time this ever happened. And so the Department of Commerce says, we don't know how to collect money. And so, but by the way, we've started the clock on the interest. So we had a buyback, we had a deal, the fisher people were paying into a fund, but Commerce couldn't accept the money. So the interest clock ran for, I think, 1.5 or 2 years, and we accumulated a massive amount of interest because the federal government wouldn't take the payments. And I've been trying for years to say, no, this is not fair, cut it out, and let's and I've worked a couple of times. I've tried to get to the floor of the appropriations process and that, and I'm still working on this, where it's still hopeful we'll get it done. It's just not right, and we want the debt reduced by the amount of that interest that was accumulated when they weren't allowed to repay their loan. So anyway, there's a lot of issues that relate to the sustainability of fishing and the fairness and the regulation. We're actually doing a good job on the West Coast. Our stocks, absent the Sacramento stock probably, and maybe the Klamath because of the drought over the last number of years, California are quite healthy. And we could have, and we've actually recovered some of our fish stocks too with some of the conservation measures we've taken. So, we look forward to sustainability in Port Orford. I was talking about new initiatives that could happen in commercial fishing and in production of seaweed there at the port and a whole bunch of other interesting things. So it's could be even more important than it is today to the coast. So my staff's giving me the evil eye and the hook because we've got a pretty tight schedule to get back up the coast to Port Orford and then up to Coos Bay. So thanks very much for being here. I appreciate it.